About what people want to study next. Let's get the door for those people here. About what people want to study next. I got it. I buzzed them in. Let's jump right in. Page 27. Morning. Copies up here. A few copies left. So one of the questions we asked at the very beginning of the discourse was, how was it that the snake knew the results of eating of the tree? Remember, we said that the snake came to Chava and said to her that don't eat of the tree, because on the day that you eat of the tree, you'll surely die. How did the snake know that? And Chava didn't know that, or Adam didn't know that. So that was the question the Alter Rebbe asked. It was one of the questions that were asked at the beginning of the discourse. So based on everything we've been studying, we're going to have the answer to this question. As we discussed throughout the discourse, Adam, who he himself was an entirely holy being, he didn't have an evil inclination. He was formulated by, as the Medrash says, he was formulated by God's hands alone. And spiritually, his spiritual standing was higher than the tree of knowledge, good and evil. So accordingly, he didn't know of such a thing as evil. Just wasn't in his purview, wasn't in his lexicon, wasn't in his consciousness. The snake, however, the serpent, does come from this place of tree of knowledge of good and evil. Right? Because even on the basic storyline, what was the serpent's agenda? Serpent's agenda, a number of meaning behind it on a basic level. The Medrash says that the serpent wanted Adam to eat of the tree. So the serpent wasn't a serpent as we understand it today, a slithering snake on the ground. In fact, that was one of the punishments for the snake, is that it now needed to slither on the ground. But the Medrash says it was actually kind of an upright being. It can talk, right? It's talking to Chava, so it was a talking being. And this snake, according to the Medrash, had the hots for Chava. That's what the Medrash says. So he was trying to get Adam to eat of the tree, so God would bump him off, as God said that the day of you eat of the tree, you'll surely die. So he would eat of the tree, he'll die, and then the snake has the bride. It's for him. Okay, that's on a basic, like just on a literal storyline. That's not a good agenda, right? That's not a holy agenda. That's a snake who has good and evil in them. But even the metaphor of the snake, which is temptation, right? The notion of temptation, which, by the way, maybe other faiths have borrowed the notion, but fundamentally, the snake in our storyline represents the snake in our storyline represents temptation. Temptation, even if temptation ultimately has a positive objective, right? As a result of temptation, overcoming temptation, we become closer to God. We come closer in whatever the context is. But fundamentally, temptation is good and evil, right? It's saying, hey, let's go do this bad thing. So the snake is not as holy as Adam, who doesn't know of evil. The snake does originate within this realm of tree of knowledge, good and evil. As we discussed again throughout this discourse, the objective, that God's not wanting Adam to eat of the tree, again, on the literal storyline, is so that Adam wouldn't have a consciousness of evil. Because what happens once we have a consciousness of evil? Then we have to struggle. I was learning a discourse earlier this morning where from the Alter Rebbe, and he talks about the idea that when we feel a blockage in our relationship with God, it's on account of sins that maybe we did earlier on in our lives, and we can never fully shed that without what he calls circumcision of the heart. We have to awaken such a profound love for God that we override the blockages. But we see the power, right? The power of sin is that it creates a coarsening, it creates a disconnect spiritually. And once we bring that into our consciousness, we got to struggle with it, right? I think I mentioned this earlier on in the course, but years ago, when the internet first kind of became a household tool, there was a big conference in New York of observant Jews. What's the big feed? The big City Field? Yeah, I think City Field, where it was a kind of this rally to encourage people not to bring the internet into their houses. And maybe early on there was this notion that you can actually keep the internet out of your house. Growing up, we didn't have TV in our house, right? And a lot of people had TV. The Rebbe said, let's use TV to help promote Judaism. He didn't say Hasidim bring TVs into your house. He said harness the power of TV for those that have a TV. So back in the day, you could get away with not having a TV. If you have a smartphone, you have a TV in your house. That's just the reality, right? So and as the world continues to accelerate with technology, it's impossible not to have internet in your house. Doesn't mean you have to have a computer, doesn't mean you have to have a browser, doesn't mean you have to watch the shows. But the reality is that the world we live in, it's part of our consciousness. So the approach, and again, all power to those that can keep themselves, I shouldn't say all power. There's a place for it, for those that keep themselves sheltered. If your life is sheltered and you don't have a job in the broader world, then all power to you. I don't mean to be critical. My punchline here is that the reality is that we, people sitting around this table, we do live in the world. So the way to deal with the world, as we're learning in this discourse, a reality of this world is that there's a battle there, there's a struggle there. So what's more important than saying, let's cut it out, which we can't always do, is to say, okay, how do we deal with these challenges? What are the tools that we need to use the internet wisely, to use technology wisely, right? You have, and as the world continue, we had a whole discussion yesterday at the Kiddush here about AI, right? AI is taken over. So there's a lot of fear around it. And the people that have fear, many of them want to say, okay, let's regulate it, let's shut it down. Okay, the reality is it's going to take over. So better than shutting it down, it's saying, okay, how do we figure out how to use it responsibly, right? There's certain realities about life in a post-Adam and Eve sin world that we have to deal with. God said, don't eat of the tree, so we don't have to deal with any of this stuff, right? That was God's, on the surface, that was God's plan. Don't eat of the tree, so we don't have to struggle. Why do we have to struggle? Why do we need to bring this stuff into our consciousness? So now we have to struggle. Let's just avoid the whole thing. But that's not the end game, and that's not how it played out. Ultimately, Adam ate of the tree. The snake knew of good and evil. And the snake was troubled by the fact that Adam and Eve were keeping their distance from the snake and from his messaging. Adam remained in this kind of, from the snake's vantage point, Adam remained in this sheltered consciousness. He said, I don't want to know about the evil. Don't bring it. I don't want to know about it. There's a fellow who I talk to regularly. He's a big gossiper. So in Yiddish, there's something in the observant community, something called the hak, right? You want to hear the hak? You want to hear the latest gossip? So when you're talking and somebody shares gossip, okay, it comes out. But when somebody formally presents, would you like to hear gossip? Right? You can't say yes. I mean, if you have any consciousness, you can't say yes. So he says, "Oh, we got some juicy hak for you." So, I'm sorry, I don't want to hear it. Like I have a little dignity. Like if you tell me and you didn't preface it, okay, it's one thing. But you're telling me, do you want to sin together? No, I don't want to sin together. Adam says to the snake, I don't want to know of you. Don't bother me. I don't want to struggle. Why do I want to bring this consciousness into my, I'd rather not deal with it. And the snake didn't like that because the snake says, hey, why should I be left out? I know all this stuff. There's a great story of the Baal Shem Tov where he was once walking with his students and they see on a Friday night and they see in a bar one of a former student, or at least he was a former observant Jew, is sitting in a bar, smoking, hanging out with all the peasants. So one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov starts, again, I don't know if this is a true story, but the messaging is a true one. We say about the Baal Shem Tov stories, if you believe all of them, you're a fool. And if you believe none of them, you say any of them couldn't happen, you're a heretic, right? So a story could have happened, but the messaging is a powerful one. So the student says to Baal Shem, look at him. He's such a lowlife. He's sitting there on Shabbos and he's smoking and he's hanging out. So Baal Shem Tov looks at his student and he says, you're jealous? You're jealous? The snake is jealous. He's looking at Adam and he says, the guy doesn't know of any evil. Right? Sometimes we look at very pious people and we have the same kind of judgment. Oh, you're so sheltered. Why do I say that? Because I want to be sheltered a little bit. I don't want to have to deal with all this stuff I have to deal with. The snake looks at Adam and he says, you're so sheltered. We got to change the game here. We got to change this up a little bit. So so the snake started coming up with some ideas. So the snake came up with a really good argument. Snake's argument is like this, because by the way, this is also how it works. Nobody does anything wrong and sees themselves as a criminal, right? Nobody in prison ever did anything wrong. They're all innocent. Somebody else is at fault. It says by Laban, when Jacob woke the next morning and his wife was Leah, not Rachel, he comes to Laban and he says, "What'd you do to me?" So what does Laban answer? He says, "Oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm a moral, upstanding person. We don't do that in our place to give the younger daughter before the older daughter." Right? Everything's got a moral argument. So the snake has a moral argument. What's the snake's moral argument? He says like this: it's good for you to struggle. Struggling is good. Because when you struggle, you have this challenge that you'll overcome. What is the snake thinking? That sometimes the good will win, and sometimes I'll win. Right now, we're not even engaged. Right now, Adam doesn't want to know of me. He has no consciousness of evil. If we engage, so then there'll be a little bit of evil. And then sometimes I'll win and sometimes he'll win, but at least sometimes I'll win. Page 28. So the snake said to himself that if Adam doesn't know about evil at all, then there's no possibility, there's no relationship between the snake and Adam. There's no relationship between the good that's within the snake and Adam. There's no relationship. There's no possibility to elevate it. But when Adam is engaged with the snake, so then ultimately there is the good that's within the snake becomes elevated. In other words, there is this process where unholiness gets the upper hand. And the end result of that, though, is that the darkness that's in the snake, is that somebody for the class? That the darkness that's in the darkness that's in the evil that's within the snake becomes absorbed by the holiness. So maybe in the short term, it seems like the unholiness wins, but in the long term, the holiness dominates. But that's the agenda here. So therefore, Babar Mumis Lechava. So therefore, the snake came with its sinister trickiness to Chava, to Eve, to convince her to eat of the tree. Like it says in the Medrash that the Samach Mem, which is another name for the Satan, came riding on the snake. We'll read the text here on bottom of 28. In the Medrash of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, he explains, in heaven there's an angel called Smael, which we refer to in short as Samach Mem. The angel was jealous of the greatness of Adam and wanted to take away his spiritual level. He found that the best agent he could use to trick Adam into sinning was the snake. So he came down, possessed the snake like a man possessed by an evil spirit. That's the idea of riding. Thus, everything the snake said was really the Samach Mem talking through the snake. It's as if the Samach Mem was riding on the snake, as it were. So, and I think what's important about this is to realize that this story repeats itself. This is the story of our existence, the story of our lives. Every time we face temptation, it's evil trying to survive. We spoke about this also earlier in the discourse. What gives evil its energy? It's engaging with it. I don't want to draw a perfect parallel here, but right, when your kids are young and one of them is irritating the other one, as an adult, we understand that if you don't show that you're bothered, eventually it gets boring, they move on. But the kid doesn't, the one that's being irritated doesn't get that. So you try to say, just ignore him and he'll go away. It takes a little while, but you got to ignore him. The more you say, oh, he's irritating me, she's irritating me, oh, it's working. I'm going to irritate you more, right? So the same thing is true. Sin, evil, exists because we engage with it. If we don't engage with it, it goes away. Right? A thought that we allow to nurture in our head nurtures in our head. And maybe if we allow that thought to come out, it's even stronger. But if we ignore it, and sometimes we got to deal with the thought, but sometimes it's okay to ignore it. Just push it away. The Rebbe would often give people instruction, Hesach Hadas, remove your mind, focus on something else. Don't focus on it. The more you focus on it, the more it becomes real. The less you focus on it, focus on something else. It'll go away. It'll stop bothering you. When we sin, we become coarse. And the more coarse we become, the more we sin. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we break the cycle and we hold ourselves back from sin, so the sin loses its grip on us. It's a very, I'm saying this like, in a very dogmatic kind of way, but it's actually very subtle. There's an energy. And when we give life, when we give attention to the energy continues to manifest itself. And it becomes stronger. When we disregard the energy, it goes away. Why is that so? Because the energy is fighting for survival. This Samach Mem, this Satan force, this energy, its whole existence is dependent on us. So it comes to us and says, please sin. Please pay attention to me. That's what the snake is doing. The snake is saying, please pay attention to me. Listen to me. Because without you, I got no purpose here. And our job is to say, okay, great. You have no purpose. Goodbye. We're not going to pay any attention to you. You're going to go away. We're not going to nurture you at all. Because we're here for a higher purpose. This makes sense? Yes? Questions? Experiences? Comments? Not all your experiences. Yes.
Why did the snake have to pay off the price?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll answer in two ways. One is that ultimately there's a plan here, right? The snake was never intended to be this upright talking being. That was a temporary state, because as we've been discussing throughout the discourse, the whole thing was a setup, right? So ultimately, you can look at it as a punishment, or you can just look at it as the snake getting to where it was intended to be in the first place. It just had to go through this process. But another answer is the Talmud says that God brings merit through those that are meritorious, and he brings culpability through those that are essentially culpable. In other words, there's a story that's told of a yeshiva student that the rabbi, the head of the yeshiva, when you're in yeshiva, you're not supposed to hang out with girls, okay? Well, maybe in some yeshivas, but not in the yeshivas I grew up in. Anyway, so it's probably not a true story, but there's a messaging here. The rabbi comes over to one of the best students in the yeshiva, and he says to him, Moshe, I heard that you're hanging out with girls. So Moshe says, but Rabbi, you know me, you know it's not true. You know, I would never do that. So the rabbi says, yeah, but about me, they don't make such rumors. In other words, the fact that they're making a rumor about you, that it's sticking, there must be something there. Maybe it's not something that you're engaged in, but something there on some subtle level. So in a certain sense, the fact that Satan chose the snake to be the vehicle through which this happened was because maybe the snake had a little bit of another agenda there that maybe wasn't so holy. Yeah.
There was a reason that he chose the snake.
Yeah. It was a good vessel for him. He saw that he had a good customer there. So what did the snake say? The snake said that Hashem knows that on the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like Hashem, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The day that you eat of the tree of knowledge, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. It wasn't just a throwaway line. It's the truth. As we discussed, the result of eating of the tree is we now become knowledgeable of good and evil, like God. The snake wasn't lying, but he spoke it in a deceptive way, but he didn't say an untruth. He was saying it in a positive way. Now you're going to be like God, right? You think only God should know about good and evil? Now you'll also know about good and evil. Now that's true, but is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Do we want to know about good and evil? Wouldn't we rather not know about evil? How much different life would be. So the snake was saying a truth, but not in Chava or Adam's interest. As we discussed, when the fact that God knows about good and evil, the fact that the angels know about good and evil, their knowledge of the evil is peripheral. It doesn't affect them. So even though the angels and God know of good and evil, it's information. It's totally depersonalized. But people can't operate that way. We can't function that way. We can't function that way. Humans can't function that way. Because we are created from God's inner dimension. And since we're created from God's inner dimension, so therefore anything that we experience becomes an internal experience, becomes an inner experience, and it affects us. So knowing of evil, we have to contend with it. We don't have the luxury of just knowing of evil as an idea, something abstract. So the snake was saying a truth. By the way, there's a lot about us that's godlike. There's a lot about us that's godlike. For example, we have the power to create. And sometimes we create good things, sometimes we create bad things. We also have a sense of self like God does. And that can be a very good thing because we can be an independently conscious person choosing good, but we can also take that consciousness and let it get to our heads and let our ego run away with us. And we can do bad things to people or to the world because we think we're that important. So being like God is very powerful, but it's not always good. Again, which is on the surface, what God wanted to avoid is that we should maintain a divine consciousness and not have to struggle. Whereas a person, if the person, as we said, who is created from God's inner dimension, knows of good and evil, so to him that is harmful. Please.
So it's talking about, it's saying the angel was operating on the level of evil. So he was aware of evil and it didn't affect him, but is the jealousy that he was experiencing, is that not itself evil?
Is that itself not evil? Is that what your question?
Yeah, the jealousy. If the angel was jealous of Adam, is that jealousy not evil?
Yes, the snake was the angel. So let me first of all contextualize. I was thinking about doing this before. Let me do it again. Do it now. And I've mentioned this before. The Jewish thought of Satan is not as it is in other faiths. Satan is not this independent power that competes with God. It's a divinely structured. It's God's agenda. Okay, so this angel, essentially, you would say, is sent by God. We say that quietly. Sent by God to execute this event, which is a very powerful messaging. So ultimately, the angel riding on the serpent to tempt Chava, to tempt Adam, ultimately is God's agenda. But in order for that agenda to be executed, there has to be the absence of divine consciousness. Because as long as there's divine consciousness, nobody wants to be disconnected from God. When we experience temptation, it's the same format. What we're looking at is God saying, I'm tempting you through this force who's tapping into the absence of divine consciousness so that you should overcome it. That's the agenda. The agenda is for us to overcome the temptation that's in front of us.
I'm trying to understand, I guess, a little bit better. You're saying it's aware of evil, not affecting Son of Man because he's operating on that level. But again, he's experiencing jealousy, at least it seems like from the text. And I'm not sure how.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So I think this snake is already the angel in his manifestation in this physical earth is already subject to consciousness of evil. In other words, he no longer is in the peripheral state.
I see.
Yeah. Anything that ends up in the realm of knowing good and evil in a way that it actually shows up in the person or the being's consciousness to create temptation it's already no longer makif. It's no longer peripheral. Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? We're pretty much at the end of the discourse. There's a little passage here that I'm going to read through that's kind of an addendum to the discourse. And then we'll kind of summarize the discourse, and then we'll see where we are. So any questions before we jump into that? Okay. Yeah, please.
But our role is like at least the stuff that we struggle with, the temptation, the good and evil, like is created right after the fall, or is it like? Because I get the idea that like everything was great, awesome, and then well, we're not exactly in Eden right now. Like, how did that world come about?
Good, great question. So let's look at the text in its most literal form. The Torah begins, in the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth. Where is that heavens? Where is that earth? That heavens and that earth is right here. In other words, the Torah doesn't say God created a spiritual heaven and a spiritual earth. It means a physical heaven and a physical earth. But then we're introduced, and we read the 6 days of creation. We read about all the physical creation. These are not spiritual trees or spiritual animals or spiritual anything. They're all physical creations. But then the Torah tells us that God put this man that he created in the Garden of Eden. He placed him in the Garden of Eden. So where's this Garden of Eden? And then if you read at the end of this story after the sin, it says that God expelled him from the Garden of Eden. And he put these fiery torches, fiery swords, these turning swords. I think that's where Harry Potter got his ideas from, right? So these swords that are doing some kind of circular thing to protect the access. So where did he send him to? And we know where he was. He was in Mesopotamia. So where is this Garden of Eden? So the answer is that the place of the Garden of Eden is a state of consciousness. It's also a physical space, this garden that Adam was in, but it's a state of consciousness, where in the physical reality, as we know it today, in other words, it's physical. It's not a spiritual. You can touch it, you can hold it. But this physical reality, what we experience is divine consciousness. Without getting too wacky here, what is reality? What is reality? When you look at something, you are processing what you're looking at. We had this crazy thing we spoke about yesterday, this fascinating technology that's developing now, where people who are paraplegic, quadriplegic, whatever, where they're implanting a chip in the base of their skull, and they're planting a chip at the top of their spine. In other words, the reason why people are paraplegic is there's a disconnect, right, between the brainstem and the spinal cord. So since so much of our body operates off of electrical current, so basically there's a chip being placed in the brainstem and a chip being placed in the spinal cord, top of the spinal cord. And these two chips, the brain, which still functions in a paraplegic, activates the chip that's at the brain, at the base of the brain, and then communicates to the spinal cord to do whatever the communication is being communicated. That sounds so sci-fi. It's so outrageous, right? But actually, it's not a big deal. It's not so fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating because we're not used to this kind of technology, but so is this thing is fascinating, you know, but it's a given, right? But show it to your great grandmother and she would tell you that no such thing can possibly exist. We were actually learning a discourse on Shabbos where the Alter Rebbe gives an example of something that people would imagine in their brain that couldn't possibly be possible, which is a flying ship. This is 250 years ago. Flying ship, and we get on them every single day. We go on flying ships, right? So what's reality? What is reality? When we're looking at something, we're looking at it through our physical eyes. Why do our physical eyes see things? Why do they see things? I'm not a maven on this stuff, but there's an energy, there's a flow, there's a light, refracts and whatnot. And then our brains process what we're seeing, which is, what is our brains? Cut open a person's head and you're going to see blood and guts. And why does that work? Because there's a state of consciousness that lives in this brain matter that lets us look at things in a certain way. Now, if we change the frequency, that instead of looking at it with our brain matter, we look at it with our soul matter, what do you see? You suddenly see the divinity, you see the divine energy that's in those same physical objects. So what causes us to not be able to see with the spiritual energy? It's sin. It's a coarsening, right? We become coarse. So our brain doesn't have the same capacity to see, to allow our eyes to see things in their spiritual state, because it's literally become coarsened. And again, it's not that novel. If you eat tofu and granola, and what else do like really super healthy people eat? Kale, right? And wheatgrass, and then and that's what you eat for 6 months, and then you pop into your mouth, a potato chip, right? You're going to get a stomach ache because your stomach is not familiar with this kind of garbage. But if you eat burgers and chips and chazarai all the time, you can even eat food that's off a little bit, and you're going to be able to tolerate it. There's an old saying that they used to say that the old Hasidim, they had brains of silk and stomachs of leather. They could eat anything, but their brains, they could comprehend very deep things. Today we have stomachs of silk. Everybody's delicate, and our brains are of leather. We can't understand anything. Okay, maybe that's a little bit overly harsh. But the point is that Adam and Eve in the world was a Garden of Eden. That's what they experienced. They saw godliness everywhere. They saw the same world, but they saw it with different eyes. By the way, we have that ability also. Maybe not to see it in the same level as they did. But when we don't take for granted that what we see is all that there is to see, then we begin to study. And the next time you face a challenge, next time you face a temptation of some sort, you're going to think about this discourse, you're going to look at that challenge differently. On many levels. Personally, you're not going to blame yourself so much. You're going to see it as an opportunity, whatever. The point is we have tools to look at the world differently. Adam and Eve, they saw godliness in the world. That's what they saw. When they sinned, they no longer were in the Garden of Eden. By default, they were no longer in the Garden of Eden because they became coarse. They no longer were able to see the godliness in the world around them. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it's very empowering because we know that we're not that far from Adam and Eve. They're not up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have the tools to know that.
Hashem gave us the Torah to be able to change how we look at the world. In the Rebbe's first discourse that he shared publicly in 1951, the Rebbe's discourse was about the world being a garden. That was the focus of his discourse, is that that God asks of us to basically restore the world to the way it was. Which means that when I gave this analogy a week or two ago, where you've got two people are walking down a blighted neighborhood, right? And one person is a real estate developer, and one person is I don't know, they're a lawyer, an accountant, a homemaker, whatever. And they walk by this empty lot, and there's cigarette butts and empty broken beer bottles, and one person, the homemaker, walks by and says, "Ugh, bunch of lowlifes living here." The real estate developer walks by and says, "Wow, we can build a high-rise here. I see money here." Right? Two people look at the same space, and one sees a jungle, and one sees a garden. How do we look at the world? How do we look at other people? Do we look at them as a jungle, or do we look at them as a garden? Do we see the good that's within them and say, okay, so maybe this beautiful soul ended up in a body with a lot of challenge, but let's help restore that soul. Let that light shine in the body. Or do we look at that person and say, oh, what a low life, right? By the way, how do we look at ourselves? How do we look at ourselves? When you look yourself in the morning in the mirror and you say, I've got all these shortcomings, I'm hopeless. Or do you say, no, I got a beautiful soul that's so powerful. I can do so much in this world with all my shortcomings. I can even maybe transform some of my shortcomings. Maybe I can't transform all of them, but I can transform some of them. I can show up based on my real power. So the choice is ours, but we have to understand what we're dealing with. That's why Torah study is so important, because it gives us the perspective to look beneath the surface, understand what's really going on there. Okay. Belakutei Torah, bottom of 29. Belakutei Torah Meharizal. So Rabbi Isaac Luria, there's a book that is a collection of Torah teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Arizal. So he explains the following. It's a little bit more Kabbalistic terminology. He says like this: Adam was exploring the supernal chambers. So, meaning, again, just as I understand this, it doesn't mean he took a rocket ship to heaven and went to the spiritual world. In this world, he was able to tap into the deeper dimensions, right? He was able to tap into the spiritual dimensions, and he was checking out the scene. What's going on in these spiritual chambers? Because Adam, he himself was higher than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the author of the Zohar, Rashbi, and is considered one of the holiest people that ever lived. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it says that he had the capacity to ascend to heaven, like Elijah the prophet. But he wanted to ultimately experience the journey of returning to the earth. But he was at such a level, which is not so novel. And the idea that Adam was so holy is not so novel, because who created him? Directly. God created him. God formed him, right? The rest of us, we come from human beings. So we could be a little judgmental of ourselves. But Adam was formed by God. He's the only person. Even Chava came from him. So Adam was formed by God. He's the holiest of beings. So he's hanging around in the supernal chambers. He didn't want to look at the unholy chambers. The snake encouraged him to at least see what's there. Just look. You don't got to touch. Just look. And once he saw, he stumbled and fell into temptation of that which was there. In yesterday's Torah portion, we read this story that after Joseph's brothers sold him, the next section in the Torah is Vayet, where the Torah tells us about Yehuda, brother Judah. And one of the things it tells us is that he turned away, he turned to the Adulamite man, and then the story continues where he ended up having children, ultimately he ended up sleeping with his daughter-in-law, and the story continues. So the question: how did the great Judah end up doing something like that? The answer is because he turned away, because he turned away from the straight and narrow. As soon as he turned away and looked elsewhere, he already became susceptible. How did he become susceptible? How did he become susceptible to even look? He became susceptible to look because he did a wrong. By not standing up for Joseph, he became coarsened a little bit. And because he became coarsened, so therefore he looked where he shouldn't have looked. He listened to the gossip that he didn't need to listen to, right? Why would we listen to the gossip when someone says, I want to tell you gossip? Because we're a little bit coarse. We're not necessarily at a level where we're ready to say, I don't want to hear it, right? We woke up maybe on the wrong side of the bed and we're feeling a little insecure, so we want to hear about someone else's shortcomings. Makes us feel a little better, right? But if we're plugged in, we're in a good place in ourselves, then we say, I don't want to hear it. I don't need to know it. So Joseph was involved in not standing up for his brother. So therefore, he became susceptible to turning away, and then it went downhill from there. Adam's shortcoming wasn't that he sinned, it's that he looked. Just the turning away, just looking itself was what set it on a bad path. By the way, there's an interesting, it says this by, in the basic interpretation of the verses, that it says that the snake went to Chava and said, why don't you eat of the tree? And she said, because God told us not to eat and not to touch the tree. But God never told him not to touch the tree. So the snake said, oh, God told you not to touch the tree. The Medrash says he pushed her into the tree. He said, see, you touched the tree and nothing happened to you. It says nothing can happen to you touching the tree. Nothing's going to happen to you if you eat the tree. What's the messaging here? Is that do what God, you want to be extra religious, that's great. But don't blame God for it. Which is great. It's great. It's great to create extra protections so that you don't come to sin. But don't equate that with God's instruction. So, but on a literal level, we see that even just, cutting a corner can sometimes put us onto a bad path. But ultimately, Adam turning away means that he turned away to the place of the impurity. What's the ultimate objective? In other words, as we've been saying all along, the whole purpose of this whole story, the ultimate purpose of the story is so we should struggle. On a literal level, God didn't want us to struggle. But ultimately, life as we know it, creation as we know, would have no purpose if we didn't end up where we are. We had to have ended up here. Because now we have a struggle. And when we struggle, we're able to go to where those sparks are, and we're able to elevate those sparks from where they are. That's the agenda.
We're definitely not boring
Oh,
as compared to an angel.
right. Some days we like to be angels, maybe. By the way, so and in this journey of Judah marrying Tamar, having children from Tamar, we have the Messianic dynasty comes from there. So going into the dark places, right? Again, we can't choose to go to the dark places. You can't say I'm going to go to the dark places because there's sparks there that need to be elevated. Only very righteous people, legitimately the righteous people, not people looking for for an excuse to go and sin, but legitimately righteous people go to places where there are sparks that need to be elevated. They don't sin, but they go to the places where maybe there's a lot of unholiness there because they know that that's their job. But the rest of us, when we fall into sin, we have an opportunity to elevate from there, but we can't go looking for sin. So ultimately, Judah did this sin. The result is that he promulgated the dynasty of Mashiach because there were great sparks. There was great light that was hidden there, but he didn't have to be the one to do it. That's how it ultimately played out, which is, again, it's our story. If we take this moment in each of our respective lives and reflect on everything that we've done and everything that's been done to us, for us, to bring us to this place. In this moment, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's so that we can uncover the godliness and the sparks that's there. There's nothing about our lives in this moment, our entire story, and even the bad choices that we've made. There's nothing about that story that's not perfectly designed for us to accomplish that which is in this moment, to elevate the sparks that are available to us right now. It's a very powerful and very comforting thought. So for those of you that came just today or come a few of these classes, tell me, please share what are you taking away from this discourse? One take home. If anybody cares to share. I won't call on you, I promise. But don't be shy. There's no wrong answer. Tell me your name, please. Dov?
I think I'm relatively recent into Kabbalistic study, and I've been reading Shar HaBitachon recently, and there's this understanding of kind of pieces falling into place for God's plan, and how everything proceeds from that. I think this is clarifying a little bit of even from the very beginning, how all of this can be part of a divine plan, even though it's also choices everybody's making. It's kind of a central tension in my understanding of all this. This is helping to clarify that.
Great, beautiful. I love that. Yeah, there's like multiple storylines taking place at the same time, and it does pose some theological challenge, but not that can't be resolved. But recognizing that all of these different storylines are all being orchestrated, right? The term that's used in Chassidus is that God is mesavev sivuvim. He causes what do they call those things? Cogs, right? They had those toys where you have like this big plastic platform that has all the right, and then you put the different wheels in there with the different spokes, and then when it's all there, you move this one, and these move, and those move, and they move the other ones, right? So there's all these things that are moving. If we could zoom out and we see all the storylines that are moving, and how one storyline is moving the other storyline, and we're center stage. It's all happening for us. I say, okay, wait, that's happening for me. So what am I supposed to do with that information? What choice is in front of me now? It's not happening to me. It's happening for me, right? It's a game changer, and each of us are responsible and obligated to say that, not because it's good habit, but because it's true, which is also mind-boggling. That everything that's happening is happening for me, but it's also happening for you at the same time. So you're here for me, and I'm here for you at the very same time.
That brings me to what I was thinking. I love the way this makes it personal for me. It makes it, when you sit at home and you try to read this on your own, you don't get the deeper meaning sometimes. I feel like I take this home and I bring it into my relationship with my husband, or I can take some of this and look at how I've grown internally. It just makes it personal. That's one of the things I love about these classes.
Beautiful. Great. Beautiful. I mean, ultimately, it's all about, the whole purpose of study is for action. Yeah, wonderful. No, anybody else? Okay. If you have something, just jump in. I want to just kind of, first of all, just let everybody know what's going on for Hanukkah. So Wednesday evening, 4:30, we have a menorah lighting in Virginia Highland at Highland Park, followed by kosher Chinese dinner here in honor of December 25th, which is a very Jewish tradition to eat Chinese on December 25th. So we'll have that. We'll have some activities here. It'll be a fun evening. It's for adults and children. So come, please join us. Please sign up for that. Thursday evening, we have a menorah lighting at Pond City Market. And then Sunday is in the Decatur Square, on the Decatur Square menorah lighting, and Monday in Atlantic Station. We will have class next Sunday and the following Sunday, provided that people will be here. Everybody planning on being here? More or less? Yes? Wonderful. Good. So now the question is what to study. So, yes.
Does it take a walk from Virginia Highlands to here? Because we're wondering where to park, how to do this.
You can park, it's about a half a mile.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You can park, and I mean, it should be pretty open, and I know you've had a little bit of a rough run with the parking, but haven't had a problem since the high holidays, so it's, they finally got it working. You haven't gotten any more tickets either, right?
No.
Okay, so it seems like it's working. It's been a pain in the neck, yes. Yes, go ahead. So it's on the corner of St. Charles and North Highland.
Oh,
Little park there, yeah. Yeah, the menorah is already there. It's been there for a couple of weeks already. In the Hanukkah spirit. Um, but we just installed our menorah out there. It's permanently installed out there. So that'll yeah. Okay. So in terms of what to learn, is there anybody have a particular preference of something you'd like to recommend? Otherwise, I'll just find another discourse as we've been doing until now, but I just kind of want to put it out there if there's any specific interest in something in particular. Okay, fine. If you change your mind, just text me. Yes. Oh, just another discourse, or if you have something specific you wanted to study, yeah. All right. Yes.
Too technical?
It's too technical. Yeah, that doesn't work for Kabbalah and coffee. We can do that. We can do that another time, but yeah, it's not mystical enough. I mean, the truth is, if you dig deep, there's mysticism there, but that's not on the surface level for sure.
I like this discourse covered most of Kabbalah, like in terms of the Adam and Eve story. It's like the Chokmah, the tree of life, like, and then all these terms that I've seen in other kind of studies. This
Yeah.
one has it all. Like it's just like it's like they say it's a fractal, like right? Got this particular event, and then everything can be applied to it.
Yeah. Good. So I have some ideas of what to study. We'll pick it up next Sunday, and it's always all of these classes are recorded live on the Intown Jewish Academy YouTube channel. So if you ever miss a week and you want to hear the class, it's available there. And that's about that. All right, my pleasure.